I grew up partly in L.A. I was in Watts and then Compton and then Inglewood, California. And my mother were together at that time, and then they separated, and my mother moved back to Bakersfield where her parents were, and all of her, extended family, immediate family was all in Bakersfield. So she went back home, and I had a sister, my elder sister, and me at that time. Of course, I had two other siblings later. But we were, I would say, on state aid. Back then, they called it welfare. And so that was assisting my mother while she was going back to school. So she was, we were in that type of housing. They didn't have the kind of structures they have today, but it was, we called it the projects. So I grew up in the projects, which is the poor part of town, and it's an isolated area, and that's where all your impoverished people lived. And after we moved from L.A. to Bakersfield, we were in the projects in Bakersfield. I went to Potomac Elementary School and then to Lincoln Junior High. And at Lincoln, I discovered, my athletic ability. And I was in 3 sports, actually 4. I played baseball, track, basketball, and football. And with no prior training, I just got out there and, with whatever I had on my bare feet or tennis shoes, hand-me-down tennis shoes and what have you, and discovered I had athletic ability. And at that point, I also felt like that was my ticket out of the projects and perhaps even go to college. So that was how I figured, because there was no way the family was going to pay for that, meaning the extended family. True enough, then I played in junior high and then high school, and I was a letterman in all 4 sports, and was all state and all conference in football, basketball, and track. Got quite a few scholarship offers in 3 of the sports. I didn't in baseball. I would have had to do AAA, which is another story I'll tell you about, where I got to meet someone who went on and did play professional football in USC and had a profound impact on me in terms of schools that I selected. But anyway, my high school coach, Paul Briggs, was a coach, as I mentioned, in Colorado, at a Colorado high school, and he and Eaton knew each other from the military. They both served, I believe, in the Navy, and both were officers. And Eaton was coaching high school in Wyoming, I think in Casper, where you are, I think. And it was either Casper or Cheyenne, one of the two. He was a coach there. And my coach, high school coach, was coaching in a high school in Colorado. But anyway, they knew each other. They played against each other, and they became friends. And my high school coach, he was sending all of his best players over to Wyoming, convincing us not to go other places if we were going to play football, because a lot of the guys were multi-sports players as well.
Now, had you ever been to Wyoming before?
I had never been out of California before.
Oh.
Until I flew off to Wyoming. So Wyoming was the Marion brothers were the ones just before me that went to Wyoming. Jerry and his brother, they both they were there ahead of me. Dave and Jerry Marion, and one got shot in college dorm and got paralyzed, and then later died in the dorm at Wyoming. And but that's a story you can kind of look up. And the Wyoming people that follow football are aware of them because they were both starters. But they had an influence on me coming there because I was a running back as well. And Coach came over to the house, Coach Briggs, and he said, I know you're going through trying to determine where you want to go to school. What are your thoughts? So I shared with him my track scholarships. I had opportunity to go to Cornell, which is I was leaning towards. And then I had an opportunity to go to Stanford, UCLA, USC, the California schools. And then there were some other offers that I had to HBCUs. And then I shared with him the basketball scholarships offers, and then obviously the football offers that had started coming in. And some of them he was aware of. And Wyoming was not on that list, by the way. So, but I was leaning towards going to USC. And I was thinking about going to USC or UCLA, one of the two. Because they were California schools at that time. They still are. They're competitors now on a national basis. So, and certainly in the conference, it's one or the other. And then Stanford, most recently, had come on the scene, in terms of football. But they were there. Tiger Woods, played at Stanford, and he lived down the street from where I'm at now in Cyprus, and so. Quite a few opportunities. So he said, well, have you ever thought about this? And he gave me the analogy. You can be a big fish in a little pond or a little fish in a big pond. I said, what's that mean, Coach? And he said, if you go to USC, you're going to sit on the bench until your junior year because they have so many athletes that come in there. It's not that you're not good, but there are always, somebody better. And you'll be waiting your turn before you get into, the varsity and actually on the roster and start playing. So 2 years of your college career, you'll be sitting on the bench, even though you have made the team, because they wouldn't recruit you if they didn't think there was a good opportunity for you to be there. And he said, if you go to a smaller college, you'll be a starter either partially because they don't do full freshman year games or schedules, and you may even start playing on the varsity in your freshman year, but certainly by your sophomore year. So that's what I mean, and with your talent and what you're doing, you can be more visible in terms of your contributions to the team if you're in a smaller college. And I said, well, give me an example. And he said, well, that a lot of the guys before you have gone off to Colorado, University of Colorado, to Arizona, to Wyoming. I said, yeah, some of them, because, Bakersfield's a kind of a small niche community as far as athletes are concerned. And we see each other, and they have athletic clubs and all that kind of stuff, where they're in the city and they still have them. And they give out what's called the Harry Coffey Awards. So I received one in each of the sports, and they put it on a little blanket, and they post them in the athletic club. And so, it's a big deal. So we all kind of knew each other, even though we were in different sports, or I certainly knew the people that were in the sport you were in. So I said, well, short and a long story, he said, Dave and Jerry went to University of Wyoming, and then he listed a bunch of other guys prior to them that went to University of Wyoming. And I said, well, why would I consider that? And he said, well, I know the coach, obviously. He said, otherwise I wouldn't be sending the guys at your caliber to that school. But I think it's worth at least getting, they're going to send you a letter of intent. I said, oh, they are? And he says, yes. I said, okay. He said, and I think you should do the college visit, the campus visit, and then decide whether you want to go there or you want to go to USC. And I said, okay. So that led to me getting the opportunity. The letter came. I didn't sign the letter of intent, but I did say, precondition that I'd like to visit the campus. So they arranged it, flew me from Bakersfield to L.A., and then out of LAX, Los Angeles International Airport, they flew me up to Wyoming. Actually, I flew into Denver and did a connecting flight to Wyoming. And so I had never been to Denver. Of course, it was a big airport. Obviously, so was LAX. But thinking, okay, so I still don't know Wyoming. What is that like? So then they put me on a prop jet. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, this thing's got propellers on it. And I'm going to be flying to where? And they said, you'll be flying into, I think we flew into Casper. And some little field between Casper and Laramie. They didn't have an airport right in the city. It was outside, somewhere in between there. And I didn't know, obviously, geographically where that was or how that was laid out. But anyway, as I'm flying in, all of a sudden I leave skylines and what have you to just hills and plains. And I'm thinking, where am I going?
Right.
And so, and next thing I know, they're talking about prepare for landing, which is, make sure your seatbelt's on. I'm thinking, prepare for landing. I look out the window, and it was like one aisle and two seats on one side and one seat on the other side. So I had a window seat, so no matter what, and I'm looking, and they're landing, and there was nothing. And I'm just saying, when I say nothing, I mean, I'm used to buildings and streets and, all kinds of stuff, but freeways and so anyway, we land in this little airport, and some guys came out to meet me, and I'm thinking, wow, I wonder what this is. This is the focus must really be on football here. There is nothing, and think back, that was in the 60s, so it's less then than it is now, and it still isn't much there now. But by comparison, there's not a fair comparison to LA or any of the, even Denver. I mean, so. But anyway, so that was my initial shock, was that I'm flying into, to me, I consider it a remote area or an isolated community. And then, as we're driving from the airport, to the city itself, into the city, wasn't a long drive, but, to me, I was just looking around and kind of quiet. They were talking, of course, but I was half paying attention because I was looking around out the window, and we ended up in Laramie. And over by the campus, so the biggest thing in the city was the university. So, and when they said we're in downtown Laramie, I'm thinking, this is downtown? So, hey, one street, so I think they got 3 or 4 now, but, back then it was one main street, and that was it. So that was my initial reaction and experience flying into the city. Didn't take my view, just kind of raised more questions than provided any answers about where I'm at, and what am I getting into.
Yeah, and Bakersfield had a robust Black community. You would have been around a lot of other Black people, and then you get to Laramie. Besides the football players and the athletes, were there any other Black people?
Well, I didn't know what the composition of the population was at that time. I didn't do any research, on the city. Of course, those are things I would do today, but at that time, being an 18-year-old, I thought, hey, I'm just enjoying the experience and the opportunity, because I was, in essence, in my opinion, living my dream, which was to play sports to get an education. And I was certainly on my way, so I didn't really focus in on the demographics of the city, and certainly, whether there were blacks or not didn't matter, because I wasn't, racially, focused or restricted in terms of my thought process until I actually started school there. After I signed the letter of intent, and just think about it, the football team, even though there were other blacks and other, ethnic groups on our football team in high school, because Bakersfield is diverse, so there was, Hispanics, Asians, whites, obviously, blacks, everything on the football team. I just thought that would be a natural reflection of, what would be there. And then it being a university, my thought was, just for a fleeting moment, because it certainly didn't factor into my decision to go there, that there would be diversity as well. And matter of fact, the word diversity wasn't even being used back then, but I thought it'd be multicultural, put it that way. And so that wasn't an issue initially. And then after I got there, everything was white. The majority of everybody I saw was white. It snowed, so the ground was white. Everybody in class was white. The only time I saw anybody that looked like me was when we went to practice at football, and then even with that, there weren't 14 of us there when I went there. They were recruiting. Eaton was an anomaly because back then, probably two, maybe I would say even three African Americans on a football team would be a high number back in the 60s. And, normally it'd be all white teams. So you didn't see, I wasn't an expectation to have a whole bunch of black folks, but we had, that he was recruiting 5 a year. And that was kind of like, and I didn't know that. I don't know if that was a quota or limit, or I never discussed with the coaching staff or the team, how they came up with their recruitment strategy. But anyway, it turned out that there were, enough guys around that I felt comfortable when I got to practice. And then was a little bit uncomfortable, but not really, because even in high school, the majority of my classes were white students. And the majority of this country was white. So it wasn't, anything discomforting about that either. So just an observation, when it go around outside of our school, that, like I said, everything was white. So that was kind of our refuge was the gridiron, going to practice or playing in the game.
And what about camaraderie with the other football players? Did everybody get along pretty well?
Yeah, I actually, initially in my freshman and sophomore year, the guy I would consider that I spent most of my time with was a guy named Ed Sinakowski. And Ed Sinakowski was the quarterback. And obviously, me being a running back when I went there, and then they moved me to a receiving position, so I was called flanker back. And back then, I sat in a slot. I wasn't on the end like a split end or a tight end, but I was off line a little bit, kind of in the backfield, but on the line, not in the backfield. And what that means is I was a running back that could catch. Because a lot of running backs, if you throw them a pass, they drop it. 90% of the time, they just don't have good hands. But I did. So because I played a number of positions both defense, offense. I even kicked point after touchdowns. I did a lot of stuff when I was in high school. So I was more of a all-around athlete in the football arena. So Eddie and I were close. And then in my sophomore year, during spring ball, Eddie and a couple of other guys on the team were on a fishing trip in Wyoming, and the boat capsized. And Eddie couldn't swim. and Eddie drowned.
Oh.
And so they couldn't save him. And a lot of people, either on the bank or in the boat, obviously were they didn't realize he was gone because he never came up once the boat capsized. But he was a hell of a quarterback and personal friend. And by the way, I think it's his cousin. His name is Ed Sinikowski too, same as him. And now he's in Las Vegas, Nevada. Took a job there, but he was up in that area, and we got to meet each other, of course, years later, because I didn't know about him, when I was playing. But he made a point of reaching out to me, and we've been staying in contact over the years. But he got in touch with me after we did our initial reunion, so he saw everybody. But obviously, Eddie had told his parents about me and his family members, not just from the perspective of, being on the team, but also being in his inner circle.
Oh, that's wonderful.
He was the closest guy to me, but the black athletes, we were all, cordial with each other and around each other, but, I didn't have any buddies, so to speak. And my roommate, John Plummer, he was from Teaneck, New Jersey. He's one of the 5 that were recruited in my class that was actually at Brigham Young, but he quit and went back to New Jersey. His father was very wealthy, and they owned a series of gas stations called Sinclair. It was a dinosaur logo on the billboard.
Oh wow!
But so him and Laverne Dickerson, I'd say Laverne and I were close, and Laverne quit. He was a defensive back. After the BYU thing, he quit and went back to New York. He was from upstate New York. He was probably the most dynamic defensive back that the University of Wyoming ever had, and he quit. And so, and then there was another guy named Rick Marshall. He was the 5th person out of our group, because Tony McGee, myself, and them, but Rick Marshall, he quit as well. So it could have been the Black 17 if those 3 guys hadn't decided to leave, but they actually quit, and they had options because Rick came from an upper middle class family, and Laverne as well. So they all decided they were going to go somewhere else. They weren't going to stay. So, but they were around through the 69, because that's all in 69 when we were going to do the protest. They were in some of the photos and stuff that, ended up in Sports Illustrated. Art Shea was the photographer for them. And so I have I've got 69 original copies of the pictorial story that Art Shea did. And we were on the cover of Sports Illustrated. So I have that one, and that one's a more popular one because I think 10 or 11 of us, matter of fact, I'm looking at it right here in front of me, were in that photo, and I got the complete series. He had to pay for it. $20,000 is what he was charging.
Oh,
and
wow.
It's probably worth more now, but, and I've shown them to different people. So we're supposed to be considered for induction into the Smithsonian Institute, the African American Museum, and I'm going to put them on consignment there so that they're not doing newspaper clippings and what have you. They've got actual real-time, behind-the-scenes, all the way through game day photos from Sports Illustrated, one of their award-winning photographers, Art Shea.
So before you guys decided to get together and talk to Eaton, do you want to walk me through just what prompted that and the previous BYU game? Because when I was doing my homework on this, certain sources were saying that this protest was in response to black men not being allowed in the priesthood. But then other stories, it's more about that game. So which one, coming from you, what really you're saying that was the catalyst? It was the game, not necessarily the religious aspects of, Yeah,
well, keep in mind, there was the original 5 that actually played at BYU. There was only 2 of us left. when the Black 14 was formed, there were only 2 out of the 14 that was actually at BYU. So there's some footage that you've probably seen where we're standing around the Black Student Union talking about what happened. And I'm one of the guys that are speaking, and Tony McGee is the other one, but I was doing most of the talking at the time. And so, meaning during that 1969 era. And the guys that talk about the priesthood, they weren't even on the team when we were played at BYU. Matter of fact, none of the other 12 guys were on the team. So they weren't there. And so that was kind of the mysteries that Phil White had, was how did you convince them to join you guys? And then you got all of the black athletes that were on, upper class, freshmen, et cetera, all together and became known as, because we didn't name ourselves the Black 14. So when some people like Mel Hamilton talks about the priesthood, well, his son's a Mormon. Mm-hmm. And so, and nobody else's didn't have any sons, so, and he had gone to the military and come back. So for him, it had a different meaning, and different ones would say what they thought. But the LDS Church, their view at that time was that when blacks died, since we were cursed, first of all, we were descendants of either Ham or Cain, depending on what story you read. But if you go to read their Book of Mormon, then you will find that, the original version, not the edited one that you have out there now, but they believed that we were descendants of Ham, who was a son of Noah, who saw his father in the nude, and in the Bible it says discovered, which means you saw him in the nude, and he was cursed, but he was a dark-complected one in that family. So all the descendants of Ham were cursed, right? So what was the curse? The curse was, when we die, we cannot ascend to heaven. So we go to purgatory, period. We don't get to go to heaven. If you're Jewish, you go to purgatory for whatever sins you committed, and then after you finish your time there, then you go on to heaven no matter what. Well, black folks didn't get that option. So when we died, we didn't go to heaven because we were cursed. And in life, before death, we could not become a priest in the Mormon church. The highest position in life, according to the Book of Mormon, was to be a priest. But because we were cursed, we were considered the lowest order of life, which is, back to the football game, they had a picture of a black man and a gorilla facing each other, and I never knew what did that mean. As we were walking into the locker room, that was posted on the wall, walking into the locker room. And I'm looking at, what the hell, And, of course, the next day on the Salt Lake cover of the Salt Lake Tribune, it said, Brigham Young washes evil off the field. And then it goes into this whole narrative about the Mormons, their belief system. And since we were cursed, we were the lowest order of life, lower than a primate. And the next lowest order above us was a female. So females couldn't go in the priesthood either. But so, shorten the long story, we could only become priests, but we were banned from that because we were lowest life, and that's where some of the guys said, oh, you can't be in the priesthood. Oh, that did it for me, or whatever. So we just told the whole story, and different guys of the 14 had different reasons. But I tell you, Tony McGee and I did not, because we were in that game, and it emanated from one thing. The behavior of the players on the BYU team, and in my opinion, them bringing their religious views on the playing field, or what we were calling the gridiron. What place did that have to do with the game? It had no place in the football arena. And whatever they believed, they believed. It didn't bother me one way or the other. They have the right, amendment rights in the Constitution to freedom of religion to believe whatever they want to believe, as long as they don't impose it on others. And I felt that they were doing that by bringing their religious views on the playing field. And then to have a headline saying Brigham Young washes evil off the field, what was the evil? It was only 5 of us, but they turned the sprinklers on the whole football team. So the whole football team had to run through the water to get to the locker room, which is on the other side of the football field. We were over there cheering after the game because we won, and turn around and the players aren't over there because we normally shake hands, even if you lose. And that didn't happen. So that prompted the whole investigative, thinking about, at least from McGee and I, and the other three guys I mentioned, Laverne and Rick Marshall and John, my roommate, we all talked about it. And then as we talked about it, they decided they were going to quit, because we were playing BYU again the next year. And, in that game, like I said in one of the other venues that you heard, it was commonplace to be gouged, in the groin area, or called nigger, or, when you get tackled and you're on the ground, and that kind of stuff was commonplace. White, majority of all the other teams were white anyway. And there was a lot of pushback that, blacks were being given the opportunity to play. So we've been referred to as the Jackie Robinsons of football, and even though he was in baseball, but, who was opening up the gates for blacks in college football? Well, they assigned that to us, after all of the other stuff that happened during that time period. So that was, we all stood around in the student union and talking about what we experienced and what the Mormons believe. And then Willie Black, who was the head of the Black Student Alliance on campus, he was a graduate student there working on his PhD, and he gave more background about the Mormon faith and the religion. Matter of fact, he's the one that found the copy of the Salt Lake Tribune's headline. It wasn't on the sports page, it was on the front page, about Brigham Young washing the evil off the field. Them imposing their issue in terms of African Americans, in my opinion, they can believe whatever they want to believe. That has no impact on us or me or the race personally until they start imposing their views and their will on others. And my feeling was, and still is to this day, that those types of issues have no place in the football arena, period. It's not a platform for any political or social issues. I just think football is football, and let's just play football. And, they tried to compare us to Kaepernick, and they wanted him to do a voiceover on one of I think it was ESPN, and they asked if, and I said no, because what his views were, he was using football to address social issues that had nothing to do with football. And we were doing just the reverse. We were saying those social issues have nothing to do, don't belong on the gridiron. And so, I guess we were using a platform to say, keep your religious views to yourself. Believe whatever you want to believe, just don't bring it on the football field. And everybody that went to BYU wasn't Mormon. And that was the other thing, so I wasn't sure how the dynamics on the campus worked, or, how they recruited, or what they did, or what they told their athletes. And it was irrelevant. Well, the only thing that was relevant to me at the time was how it impacted us in that game and how we felt in that game. A lot of people will respond to what people do. A lot of people will respond to what people say. But everybody responds to how somebody else makes you feel. The feeling was not acceptable to me. It wasn't comfortable to me. And it was something that couldn't be ignored. So we beat them. And later Eaton said, hey, go out there and beat them with your black skins. Well, Coach, that was the locus of the issue to begin with. If we weren't black, then it wouldn't have been an issue. If we weren't black, this never would have occurred. So going out and beating them with our black skin isn't stopping them from, the stuff that happens when they get tackled. And by the way, Eaton wasn't there either because it wasn't a varsity game. And so that's why we wanted to go and talk to him was to tell him what we experienced. And hey, by the way, some of your coaching staff can attest to what happened because they had to run through the water as well. And so, that was why, for me, that's why I wanted to and was supportive of going over there and speaking to him to say, hey, coach, you weren't there. Here's what happened. And here's what we decided to do amongst ourselves was wear these armbands so that there's a visual other than our black skin method of demonstration that we're not happy with, their views being brought on the playing field. Is this okay? And if he said yes, then we would award them and played in the game. And then that would have been one of the highlights as we beat them again, because we were one of the top teams. I mean, we were bowl bound again, heading to a bowl, and we probably would have had an undefeated season because I think we were one of the best teams that, according to him at that time, that he had ever had. And they'd been to two bowls at least while I was there, Sun Bowl and the Sugar Bowl. So I'm just saying that. We never got that opportunity to share that with him. And some of the members of his coaching staff, I'm sure, told him, prior to coming over there or certainly afterwards, what we were really trying to do. But we never got a chance to do that, so.
Huh. Yeah, so
that's why some of the guys thought about the Mormon can't be a priest and what have you. I could care less, me personally, whether you're a priest or a patron in the church. It didn't matter to me one way or the other. So I had a different view, and that's why, if you poll the guys, different ones had different reasons. But we were telling everybody in the student union, and then these guys decided they were going to join us. And they didn't have to. So we also caveated it, McGee did, verbally that, hey, some of you have family, some of you, may not agree with our position. So if you don't join us, then we're not going to hold it against you. And then obviously 3 of the guys went back on the team after getting kicked off and opening the opportunity. So Don Meadows and Ted Williams and John Griffith all went back and asked for their scholarships back. And so he was right. I mean, McGee was right that everybody didn't, see it the same way and had different reasons for why they took that position. So there was no consensus other than we were going to protest and that we agreed to wear the armbands. That was it amongst ourselves before we went over there.
It would just be so painful in hindsight, leaving that game and having been treated so poorly, just disrespected as a fellow athlete. How do you deal with that today?
Well, today, of course, I'm I'm 50 years older, and so 50 plus years older, and have lived a lot of life, and our country has changed and evolved and revolved. There's been revolutions along with the evolution in our country. Keep in mind, Kennedy was killed in the 60s, Martin Luther King Jr. in the 60s, Malcolm X in the 60s. I mean, so a lot of things happened in this country that have shaped the way things are viewed and how things are experienced. And, we've had an African-American president of the United States. We've got a black female vice president of the United States. We've had, blacks at the Supreme Court level, and we're in all levels throughout, totally integrated in the American system, both mentally and physically. And so to think about it in reflection, what we experienced was time-specific and relevant to the time that we were in that era of our country's development. And I'm very proud of the fact that for whatever reason, each one of those gentlemen decided to join us. They joined us. And it wasn't just, 2 or 3 people, trying to have a voice and expressing, at least we had an opportunity to begin to have a dialogue which we thought we were going to have. Instead, we got a monologue from Eaton. But today I have no regrets, and I wasn't angry then. So I'm certainly not angry now. And I looked at life a little bit different from most. Even today, amongst the group, but we're all different. And I saw it as it was a life-changing experience, and it was meant to be. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. And the universe intended everything that happened to happen, just the way it happened, and not one thing different. And the only thing I needed to do was be prepared for the blessings or the gifts that I was going to receive as a result. So, I went on and I have, 4 master's degrees. I have my, obviously my undergrads, so I, worked for 2 Fortune 500s, General Motors. Was part of the first 10 people to name, launch, and roll Lexus out worldwide for Toyota. I became a vice president there. Was one of the first African-American vice presidents for Toyota. And in the automotive industry, had a lot of firsts in terms of my corporate positions on my executive track, both at General Motors and as well as at Toyota and Lexus. And now I'm an executive consultant and coach. So, I just, have blessed with my health and my family. And those things would have all been different had that not happened. My whole trajectory would have been different because I would have been in the NFL, and who knows what was going to happen going forward. Even though I did try to go back and be a walk-on, and I was told that I was a rabble-rouser and a troublemaker, and at one point Dallas Cowboys was going to give me an opportunity, but I wasn't going to be drafted. So I was coming in with caveats, so I decided, and I went to camp, by the way. They practice here in California in Thousand Oaks at Cal Lutheran College. They still do every year. They do the exhibition season there. And Landry was the coach back then. And so I thought, I had an opportunity to play, but I could make as much in the automotive industry as they would pay me on the football team. So why would I do that, and be part of that team? And back then it was Staubach and Bob Hayes and Renfro, and it would have been me. So I would have made my way into the starting lineup. Joe Williams, one of our Black 14, he went there, so he was there already from Wyoming. So I just there was and I think Jay Berry tried out with him too later, but because he was a year behind us. So I have no regrets. I think and if I could do something, if there's something that was a void, is my conversation with Lloyd Eaton post what happened at Wyoming, and the conversation would have been, Coach, why? What was going on with you? What pressures were you under? What were the other coaches in the league and the conference and nationally doing, because you had all these black players on your football team and they didn't, and it wasn't a popular thing in those days? What pressures were you under? So I'm not just going to take it literally that you felt we were defying you because we walked in the field house with black armbands and you had told Joe the night before that was an object of your concern and grounds for termination or being kicked off the team. We didn't know that. And so I don't think that was all that there was to it, that you didn't even give us an opportunity to have a voice and say anything. It was, anytime somebody tried to say something, always shut up or sit down or, and then he said what he had to say and then walked out. So, and then we were just sitting there dumbfounded. I'd want to have that conversation, not only because his coach and my coach were friends and it was a different dialogue at that time to even get me to come there, and, if I had listened to my family friend and mine, Mike Garrett, was a star at USC and then played for the Rams the first time the Rams were in LA. And so I'm just saying that, there was and then became a athletic director at USC later. And if I had listened to Mike, he was a running back. He played baseball too. And I'd have been at USC. So when you go back to all the wouldas and couldas and, it doesn't make any sense because this is where you are. And I'm just thankful and grateful that everything that happened. Even right now, Kobe, you and I having this conversation, we wouldn't be having it if just one thing had been different. What? The coach giving us a chance to say what we came over there for, and for him to say what he did, go out there and beat him with your black skin, but you don't need those armbands. If he had said that and you're still on the team, but he walked in and said the very first thing, save you a lot of time and trouble. As of now, you're all through. And in January, you can start looking for somewhere else to go. And maybe the Morgans and Grambling states will put up with this, but not here at Wyoming. And you're defying me. Most of you come from split homes and broken families and don't know who your father is. And I'm the only father image that most of you even know. If he hadn't said all of that, and you hear I'm quoting it because it's reciting it out of my head. I'm not reading the script. So those things are still indelibly etched in my mind, and it should be. Some things you don't need to forget. You just use them as platforms to understand when you do your self-inventory of things not to do. They're lessons learned. And so, again, I have no long-winded way, as usual, Guillermo, answering a question that, to me, no question is just simply yes or no.
I love it. Yeah, as an interviewer, it's great. Makes my job a lot easier. Sometimes I'll ask someone what I think is a profound question, and they just give me like two words. I'm like, okay. Is there anything else you feel about it? So, no, I think it's great. And you're so right. It's like some of these moments that are our greatest moments of persecution can either make or break a person. And it definitely sounds like the former happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
Were you worried about your teammates? Did it go differently? I'm sure everybody after that, went their different ways. And I just wonder if at that point you were kind of remorseful or even had some sort of sadness about what would happen. And, oh my gosh, if we hadn't done this, this wouldn't have happened. Of course, in hindsight, you made history. But I just wonder about anxieties about, oh God, like maybe some of these people don't have anywhere to go, that kind of thing.
Well, that's a great question because we're more introspective now and more reflective now than we ever were before when we have to go back and, like I use the term self-inventory, and reflect on, what could I have done differently? What could I have done better? What could I have said differently or said, in a better way? And when you start looking at impacts on lives, some of us didn't really know the histories and stories behind the other guys' lives. We weren't that close where even now, we formed the Black 14 LLC. We formed the Black 14 Entertainment LLC because they're getting ready to make this movie and this 8-part series on Showtime. And then we did this thing with Jonathan Hawk, with Dr. Harry Edwards, who was the guy that was, with the Tommy John Carlos and Tommy Smith that raised their fists at the Olympics. He was, and so they've already filmed it. It just hasn't aired yet. I think it's going to air this month, Black History Month. And that was, a Showtime piece. So I think when I think about Jim Isaac, who his wife killed him, or Don Meadows, whose brother was shot in the back of the head in a movie theater in Denver, because he was with a white woman who happened to be his wife, but the guy who shot him didn't know that. And then Don dies. Or Earl Lee, who was an educator in Baltimore, Maryland. And, I was out there with the Congressional Black Caucus, sat on their board, which is an organization for all of the black congressmen and women nationally But when I was at Toyota and Lexus, I served on their foundations board, which is a whole nother story that helped get Obama elected, etc. But Earl, he dies, and so his son is there today. Even though I think Earl stayed and got his degree, finished graduating because he was an upperclassman. Mel stayed. I don't know if Mel graduated. I think he did because he stayed there and got, went on. John went back on the team, and he certainly got his degree because he showed it in the ESPN video. And he stayed, in Denver and Wyoming area. And then I look at everybody else that I hear about and that I've now since gotten closer to. There's probably out of the 14, I'd say 4 guys whose lives were, other than the ones that died, but even before their deaths, things had moved in different directions for everybody. And yeah, everybody, because I think everybody could have been pro-bound or would have had an opportunity on a professional team. We were just that good. And all of our lives would have been different if Eaton had just given us a chance to say what we came over there to say. And nobody said, and they accused me of that, hey, I'm not going to, even if I can't wear this armband, I want Eaton fired. I'm going to so either I'm wearing an armband or I'm not going back, even if he let us back on the team. Nobody said that. Nobody said anything because we didn't get a chance to. So, and then so I listened to the administrators and what have you, and I was in the depositions, I was at the court hearings, and there was another pivotal point, which was the attorney that represented us. Joe Williams and I were being deposed. I think we were in Cheyenne. Or Casper. But anyway, it's a matter of records, so you can look up the deposition, and the court records. And the judge wanted to know what the members of the Black 14 thought about the offer that was put on the table. And I looked over at Joe, and he was being deposed. And what offer? Was my thought, what offer? And the assistant attorney, who was a local guy, along with attorney William Waterman, who was the primary attorney out of Pontiac, Michigan, it was the civil rights brought him out there because he was a constitutional lawyer. And so he was representing us. So Willie Black was part of that, and Dr. Harry Edwards, and as well as Bill Cosby, regardless of what you think of him now. But they were the one that had a special dinner, and then they got the funding, and that's how we got that attorney. But we were waiting for that attorney, for William Waterman, to show up at the court. And they were asking the representing attorneys, what was the reaction? And they said, well, you're going to have to ask Attorney Waterman because we didn't pose the question to the members of the 14. So I'm still sitting there thinking, what question? What offer? And then finally, Bill Waterman shows up, and the judge asked him, that was the first thing, because he didn't want to go through the hearing and for us to, after the depositions and what have you, there was going to be a preliminary hearing that day. And he asked Waterman, in front of us, attorney, what was the response or the reaction to the offer that was placed before the members of the 14? And he said, I never shared it with them. And I'm still thinking, what did he share? And it was what he had said, what the offer was. And then the judge asked him, well, why? And he said, I didn't think it was in their best interest, so as their attorney, I decided not to pose the question and just go forward with the action as has been filed. And so what had been posed was they were going to let all of us come back on the team that wanted to come back on the team. They were going to drop the case. They wanted the case to be dropped, and they were going to fully reinstate all the players that wanted to come back, not selectively pick who he wanted and didn't want. And Coach Eaton had agreed that instead of him being part of the interview process, that the recruiting coach would be the one to talk to each player. So whoever recruited you, that's who you were going to be in front of and they were going to be talking to you about coming back on the team or not. And they were sitting in Laramie waiting for the phone call, and they were going to carpool it down to the court to start the conversation before we went any further with the suit. And we were never asked. And so in my opinion, it would have been a very different outcome had that been presented to the members of the 14. And there were no caveats and no conditions, are tied to it where, either you'll want to play football here and finish your education here and move on with your life, or you don't. And you want to stay with this action, which, you had been dismissed and we had till the end of the year to get out anyway, or come back individually and ask for your scholarship. So to me, when I reflect on how our lives could have been different and how it might have impacted any of the other guys, we were all impacted by that lack of communication, that lack of judgment that our attorney exercised and we were never aware of. So to me, that was, and guess what? And we didn't have any post meetings where we all huddled and Joe and I said, hey, here's something that happened that you guys ought to know. Some of the guys are just finding out about it now, 50 plus years later, that was even an option. Because we weren't close enough that, we left and we all stayed in touch and we all, Phil White, if it wasn't for him, and at that time he was an editor here in Laramie over at the Branding Iron, your local newspaper. He was the historian because he was there when we went to meet with the legislatures and the president of the university, and when Governor Hathaway flew in and sat around the table and talked to us. Phil White was sitting there. Phil White was, shadowing every single aspect of what we did as the editor and reporter there in town. And he's still been that to this day. So we had to reach out to Phil White to find everybody. He kept in touch with everybody. We didn't keep in touch with each other.
Wow.
So, other than Tony McGee, he was in my wedding. My first wife died of cancer. The lady I was married to when I was at Wyoming, and mother of my two sons. I had three sons, and my oldest son, he died when he was 4 years old. So back in that same time period, I had a son and he died. But fast forward, Tony McGee and Lionel Grimes came to my wedding in Detroit. And I was in Detroit, Michigan at the time, and Jay Berry was there too. Jay was supposed to be at the wedding as well. He was a local newscaster, and I was a corporate manager at General Motors at the Pontiac division there in Pontiac, Michigan, in the Detroit area. And other than those three guys, and then I saw Laverne Dickinson, who was one of the original five that was there. He came through there one time as a tennis coach with a couple of young people that were on this tennis team. And they played in a tournament that was there in Detroit, and we just happened to run into each other there. But other than that, there was a total disconnect with everybody else. I didn't know that, what had happened with John Griffith, and that the teachers on that campus, were going to offer scholarships and pay for us to get our education. Nobody contacted us. Nobody picked up the phone and said, hey, guys, here's something new, breaking news, or nothing. So I don't have a lot of empathy for everybody's lives because I wasn't involved in them and didn't know what they were doing or not. And then to hear some of their stories posted, then yes, I think that had either Bill Waterman, Attorney Waterman, shared with us the option that we had, the offer that was on the table, lives would have been vastly improved. Had Coach Eaton allowed us to ask our question and then him give us the answer, which we were going to honor and respect because we honored and respected him, even though some of the guys didn't like him. And listening to some of them, they had more problems with our team than they had with BYU. And I'm thinking, where's that coming from? because I didn't experience what they experienced. So I guess the most moving thing was when my grandfather, when it first happened, said to me, Guillermo, I don't understand. You just got your head from under the white man's foot. Why would you take this stance? And I said, Grandpa, I want more than my head from under his foot. I want my whole body. And then he looked at me, and I said, I want to be in corporate America. I want to wear a white shirt and a tie. And I want to sit across a boardroom table. Never did I know all that was going to happen. And it all happened. But that's what I said I wanted. And then when he gave me the stamp of approval, then we both cried.